Well, you may have recently heard that Walgreens was going to be acquired by private equity firm Sycamore Partners. It is not the first time, and probably won't be the last, that we will hear about private equity's involvement in the healthcare sector, as it has been growing significantly in the last many years. To discuss where this takes healthcare right now, we're joined right now by Atul Gupta, who is Assistant Professor of Healthcare Management here at the Wharton School. Atul, great to talk to you again. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me again, Dan.
Thank you. And again, this latest announcement with Walgreens kind of highlighting the influence or the importance that private equity sees in the healthcare sector right now. Tell us about how you view the connection between private equity and healthcare at the moment.
Yeah, so as you said, private equity has been growing its investment into healthcare, particularly in the US, over the last decade. If you chart their growth in healthcare, it's been growing pretty much every year on year, until 2021. That was the peak when we had about 100 billion with a B dollars of investment in healthcare. But since then, as you know, the interest rate environment has turned pretty unfavorable. There's also been this sort of vibe session, recession sort of concerns. And so since then, actually, private equity investments in healthcare have dropped. 2022 and 2023 were actually pretty linear. And the early numbers from 2024 suggest that now things are beginning to rev up again. And so, now we have this new deal suggesting that 2025 might actually be going back in the same direction of higher deal values.
So, what has private equity then brought to healthcare?
So that's a great question, and honestly, I don't think that there's a consensus on that yet. There's if you just look at it conceptually, private equity can be a vehicle for great good because they tend to be more efficient. They tend to bring investments into IT and sort of cutting edge management practices. They're obviously very sophisticated in their financial practices. So all of that suggests that there could be some good there. But then on the other hand, because it's such a high powered financial incentive model and because healthcare markets are so imperfect, if you bring these two forces together, it could lead to some negative consequences for patients, for taxpayers. And so there has been some evidence suggesting that when private equity gets involved, particularly in healthcare providers, for example, evidence from hospitals and nursing homes, they tend to cut back on staff, which can lead to poor quality outcomes for patients. So I would say the evidence is pretty mixed.
And it sounds like the issue of transparency is one that seems to be a concern by many on the outside.
Absolutely. I would say transparency is probably one of two most important issues with the involvement of private equity in healthcare. It's as you may know, it's very difficult to actually track the ownership of these firms. When a private equity invests in a target, it's very difficult to figure that out because they use a very complex structure of ownership. The deal terms are not transparent to outsiders, and by outsiders, I mean anybody who's not a party to the deal. Because it's a private business model, they don't have the same kind of regulatory compliance that publicly listed firms face. So there are a number of challenges to actually tracking the performance of private equity owned firms.
But it seems like there are states that have concerns about the level of growth, Pennsylvania, where we are, being one of them. Tell us to take us through that side of the story.
Yeah, a number of states are actually considering regulatory action on their own without waiting for the feds on improving on increasing transparency on actually not just private equity. So California looked into this, but I think at the last minute, um, Governor Newsom vetoed that bill, which would have actually given the state attorney general more power to block healthcare deals by private equity firms. In Pennsylvania, again, the legislature is looking at this as well. Here, I think I'm more optimistic that actually there'll be more significant action that'll be taken, particularly with regards to transparency and how data will be available, not just on private equity, but also, transactions above a certain size.
Is the decision process for then businesses in healthcare, and look, you have big health systems and you have smaller businesses like physical therapists, et cetera. I mean, I would think it can be a relatively simple decision to invite private equity into your business and to provide the support that maybe some businesses are looking for.
Absolutely. I think that for small practices, physician practices like physical therapists, like you mentioned, I think for them, it private equity can be a real help because they bring in some of this technological support, management support, access to capital that they lack on their own. And actually, it can make life easier for the physician. And that's part of the appeal of private equity, particularly for young physicians who, don't, there's been a cultural shift, and the newer generation of physicians don't actually want to get bogged down in all that goes into running your own practice. That being said, I've spoken with a number of physicians and sort of, reading about this in the academic literature. Physicians are now beginning to get worried that with all of this investment and the good, there's also some concerning things that come in, which is that private equity firms sometimes start controlling your treatment decisions, or they may influence you, towards doing certain kinds of procedures. The other thing that doesn't directly affect physicians but affects society at large is that private equity firms, when they acquire these physician practices, they renegotiate the prices with private insurers, and they try to get higher prices. And what that means for patients and customers in general is that the cost of your healthcare premiums goes up, whereas the quality of the service may remain the same.
But we don't have definitive data that the care has been impacted to this
No,
point,
not on the
correct?
physician practice side. In fact, I am quite optimistic that private equity involvement with physician practices and small businesses in general can actually improve their efficiency, and hopefully some of those efficiencies can then get passed through to insurers in the form of lower costs.
And this all coming at a time where we're seeing a big change in healthcare anyway, with the move to digital. Obviously, when you look at labor, healthcare has been a big supporter of the labor markets over the last, what, decade or so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Healthcare is now, if not the largest, it's probably one of the top two or three largest sectors in terms of employment in the US. And as we all know, healthcare is recession proof, or at least perceived to be recession proof. We'll find out. And so that's part of the appeal of private equity also, for why they're interested in healthcare is because they think that healthcare will continue to grow.
But it sounds like this is an area to watch when you talk about the investment that PE is making in healthcare and what the government at the state or local level might be looking to draw out of them in the months and
Oh,
years
yeah,
ahead.
absolutely. I think we should all watch this space very carefully. Governments are going to seek more transparency. I would encourage them to also think about aligning the incentives of private equity firms with those of patients and taxpayers in the form of, perhaps, in the use of value-based payments, which link their performance on quality and spending to their payments. So I think you'll start to see some movement on that. And then, of course, if private equity does get back to the good old days, then you'll start seeing a lot more deals, particularly on physician practices.
Atul, great to talk to you. Thanks for your insight. All the
Thank you so
best.
much.
Thank you. Atul Gupta, who's assistant professor of healthcare management here at the Wharton School.